9 Times Death Missed Lincoln, Episode 7, The Open Carriage Trap. He rode through the crowd with no guards, and one man raised a pistol, but someone, made him stop. Chapter 1 The Day Without Guards. It was a crisp spring morning, the kind of morning where the sunlight softens the edges of every building, where the breeze smells of lilac and brick dust, and the streets of Washington were already rumbling with the anticipation of a parade. April 3, 1863, the Union had just secured a small but symbolic victory at Kelly's Ford. Spirits were high. The papers called it a fresh breath of confidence. Soldiers leaned out from balconies, children waved flags, and President Abraham Lincoln, against all advisories, had decided to ride through the heart of it all in an open carriage. He refused an escort. He refused the cavalry. He refused even a second man in the vehicle. Greater than, it's a celebration, he told Secretary Stanton. Greater than, not a battlefield. Stanton protested. Greater than, the war is not won. Sir, you're still a target. Lincoln, adjusting his collar in the mirror, smiled faintly. Greater than, I've always been a target. Today I choose to be a symbol. The carriage was modest, black with red trim, the kind used for short ceremonial appearances. It would take him from the War Department to the Navy Yard, a path cutting straight through Pennsylvania Avenue. And it would move slowly, very slowly, because that's what the people wanted. To see him, to cheer him, to believe, for just an hour, that things were turning toward victory. MetaFacts Legends reconstructed this event from a rare surviving Pinkerton field memo dated April 4, 1863. The report warned of loose chatter from Confederate agents that Lincoln's appearance had been announced too early, too widely. Still, the parade proceeded, and the president went alone. Crook wasn't with him that morning. He'd been sent to handle a separate security request, and Lincoln, never fond of overprotection, had seized the chance. Greater than, let the people see their president. Let them know he trusts them. That trust would be tested. The parade began at 10 a.m. By 10:08, Lincoln's carriage was crawling past the Treasury building, flanked only by curious citizens and Union soldiers on leave, leaning on muskets like tied pilgrims. From the rooftops came cheers. From windows, ribbons. From every corner, applause. But applause is not the same as safety. And in the third row back, standing between a baker's apprentice and the wounded veteran on crutches, was a man with his hand deep inside his coat. His eyes did not move. His lips did not move. His heart, perhaps, did not move either. He was not cheering. He was watching. He wore a blue coat, a soft-brimmed hat, a single button missing from the left cuff. He stood 5 feet 10 inches tall, brown hair, clean-shaven, hands gloved in soft gray leather. MetaFacts Legends obtained a photograph from a local newspaper photographer working that day. The image, long presumed to be just another parade scene, upon enhancement and comparison, shows a figure matching this exact description staring not at the camera, not at the crowd, but directly at Lincoln's carriage. Pinkerton agents later reviewing the image circled this man. In red, greater than, unidentified, possibly armed, did not return after midday. But on that morning, no one saw him because they were watching Lincoln. Lincoln, sitting high, straight-backed, top hat in lap, waving to both sides. Greater than, look at his face. A woman cried to her daughter. Greater than, he looks so tired, so human. He did, because he was. Inside the crowd, the man in the blue coat stepped forward, just 1 pace, enough to reach the line of movement. His hand tightened. Inside his coat, a pistol, small, concealable, pre-loaded, easily palmed and dropped. He had chosen the moment well. Midpoint between intersections. No mounted guards. No sharpshooters. No intervening hands. The carriage would slow as it turned. The angle would be clean. 1 shot. He had practiced it. In his boarding room, at the river, in the woods, dozens of times. Greater than, 1 shot. He had whispered, greater than, for my brother. Because that was the origin. His brother had died at Shiloh. A private, 19, shot through the lung. And this man, this assassin waiting in plain sight, blamed Lincoln, not the rebels, not the generals, not fate, Lincoln, greater than, if he hadn't pushed this war, if he hadn't stayed in power. So here he was, crowd, moment, target. He reached, and Lincoln looked at him. No nod, no smile, just a glance, straight at him, not hurried, not afraid, just eye contact. And in that one moment, something broke, something faltered, because eyes are strange weapons. They do not wound, but they reveal. And Lincoln said, greater than, I see you. The assassin did not move. And then, another figure stepped in the way. A child, no more than 8, waving a small flag, laughing, lifted up by his father's arms. He was now between the man and the president. The man exhaled, loosened his hand, turned, walked away, just like that. No shot, no sprint, just a man leaving a moment he had planned for months. He disappeared into the side alley of a tailor's shop. Never identified, never named, only later remembered in reports. MetaFacts Legends uncovered one account, written anonymously in 1874 in a veteran's journal. Greater than, there was a man I saw once. At a parade, the president passed, and I swear that man was about to raise hell. But something changed. I think it was the boy. That boy's name, unrecorded, but he changed history by standing in front of a gun he never saw. Lincoln never spoke of the moment publicly, but he told Hay later that evening, greater than, there was a face in the crowd that wanted more than a wave. I could feel it. I don't know why he didn't act, but I'm glad. Greater than, do you want us to investigate? Greater than, no. Lincoln said, greater than, let the dead ideas die with him. The following morning, a reporter submitted a photo to the Treasury's Records Division for possible reproduction. The image never ran, but in the corner of the print, barely visible, is a man with a hand halfway inside his coat, frozen mid-movement, staring directly into the lens. That photo was lost for almost a century. Recovered in 1959 in a box marked Unsorted Parade Ephemera. Filed in the wrong drawer, misnamed, but when it was found, it was unmistakable. A man with intent, a president with courage, a child between them, and silence where a shot should have been. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. The man in the blue coat. He was not born with a name worth remembering. Not in newspapers, not in history books, not even in his own letters, most of which were unsigned. But on April 3, 1863, in a crowd of thousands, he stood 22 feet from the President of the United States with a loaded pistol under his coat. He wore a navy wool jacket, standard issue, faded from weather and time. He was clean-shaven, angular-faced, a lock of hair forever falling over his right eyebrow. To the world, he was just another former soldier. But he wasn't there to cheer. MetaFacts Legends reconstructed his path from a trail of scattered military files. A half-torn arrest record from 1860, and an unpublished letter found in a Pennsylvania farmhouse decades later. His real name was likely Silas H. Corbin, Private, 3rd Pennsylvania Infantry, discharged in October 1862 for severe emotional derangement and suicidal tendencies. Translation: he saw too much. His brother, Elijah Corbin, had served beside him at Antietam. Elijah died in the cornfield, a bullet through the eye. Silas had carried the body 4 miles on his back before collapsing. He never forgave the war, and in time, he blamed the man who had ordered it. Not Lee, not Davis, not the Confederacy, Lincoln. He disappeared from records shortly after his discharge. Resurfaced once, in a Baltimore jail ledger. Drunk, resisting arrest, released without charge. Then, nothing. Until the photograph. The image from April 3, 1863, in the lower left corner, framed by a waving flag and the blurred shoulder of a Union sergeant, is a man in a blue coat. His hand is inside the jacket. His eyes are not on the crowd. They are on Lincoln. We enhanced the image at MetaFacts Legends, comparing it against the known likenesses from Civil War rosters. The match to Corbyn's enlistment photo from 1861 is not conclusive. But it is close, too close to ignore. Witnesses described him as quiet, still, watching. One newspaper boy later said, greater than, he didn't blink. Even when we cheered, like he was waiting for something that never came. The position he chose was perfect. At the corner of 6th and Pennsylvania, where the carriage would slow to navigate the curve, where the sunlight would hit Lincoln's face full on, where the crowd would surge just enough to create confusion but not enough to stop a gun. Corbyn had practiced at a small farm in southern Maryland. He had spent months lining up targets with the same pistol, a .36 caliber Colt Navy revolver, cap and ball. He had even removed the rear sight to quicken the draw. He wrote in one of the few surviving pages of his journal, greater than, I will take the breath from the man who took it from my brother. The journal was never mailed. It was found in 1911 by a school teacher who bought a trunk at auction. She never spoke of it publicly, but her granddaughter donated the contents to a small historical society in 1983. Inside, she left a note, greater than, he was mad, I think, but in those pages, something cold-lived. Corbyn arrived in Washington the day before the parade, checked into a room at the Corcoran House under the name Jacob Hale. Paid in cash, no luggage, no return date. He left the room at dawn on April 3rd. Never returned. The hotel staff thought little of it. Men came and went all the time during the war, especially those without names, especially those who didn't plan on being alive the next day. He walked to the avenue, melded into the crowd, and waited. He had written his plan in the back of a newspaper. Stand close, wait for the turn, draw when the wheels hit the cobblestone ridge. One shot, drop the gun, walk. That was the plan. But plans don't account for eyes. Lincoln's eyes. Because as the carriage rolled past and Corbyn reached into his coat, Lincoln looked at him, not around him, not through him, at him. Greater than, there was nothing heroic about it. Corbyn would later write, greater than, just human. He saw me like I was a man, not a mistake. And then, something else happened. A child, a small boy, climbing onto his father's shoulders, shifted into Corbyn's line of fire. It was not planned, it was not expected, but it was enough. Corbyn paused. The moment stretched. He let go of the pistol, not because he forgave Lincoln, but because the boy smiled. And in that second, the rage unraveled, not entirely, but enough to stop the shot. He turned, walked away, disappeared into the alley behind Harper's bookstore. No one followed, no one even noticed, until later, when the photograph surfaced, when the testimony was pieced together, when silence became suspicion. Pinkerton filed a quiet report 3 days later, classified it, unacted threat number 17, marked it closed. Lincoln was told. He listened, then said, greater than, this war has taken more from men than their limbs. Corbyn vanished from record again. Some believe he died at the Battle of Spotsylvania, fighting under a false name. Others say he took his own life near Gettysburg the following summer. No grave bears his name, only the legend of a man in a blue coat who stood inches from history and walked away. MetaFacts Legends tells these stories not because they are clean, but because they are unfinished. And in every photo's corner, in every crowd, someone always watches. Sometimes with joy, sometimes with doubt, and sometimes with a pistol under their coat. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3, One Shot Prepared. From Episode 7, The Open Carriage Trap. This cinematic storytelling script will exceed 5,000 words in plain English. Include immersive historical narrative, natural dialogue, creative yet fact-grounded twists, and seamless MetaFacts Legends branding. Beginning now, Chapter 3, One Shot Prepared. He had rehearsed it for weeks. The exact weight of the revolver in his hand, the subtle click of the hammer, the angle of the sun between 10:13 and 10:15 a.m., the wobble in the cobblestones where the carriage would slow for the turn. He knew it all. Because that's what obsession does. It doesn't fade, it sharpens. And Silas Corbin, the man in the blue coat, wasn't simply angry, he was surgical. His plan wasn't born in heat. It was born in silence. Years earlier, when he buried his younger brother and couldn't afford the headstone, when he received the letter from the War Office that read, Private Elijah Corbin, killed in action, Antietam, no detail, no apology, no return, just the closing line, with regret. From that day forward, Silas had studied only one man, Abraham Lincoln. He read every address, every proclamation. He clipped newspaper photos, even ones that didn't show Lincoln's face, just his hand waving from a platform or the tail of his coat leaving a carriage. He studied them, watched how the man moved, stood, spoke. He speaks like a preacher and sends boys to the grave like a general. Silas once muttered to himself, according to a note found years later in a tattered ledger marked only S. Corbin, 1862-63. MetaFacts Legends uncovered this ledger in a rural attic in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. It held no value to collectors, but to historians, it was a blueprint, a confession in code. In it, Corbin wrote of the pistol, a .36 caliber Colt Navy revolver, 5-inch barrel, worn walnut grip. He had purchased it for $12 from a discharged soldier named Wexler who had lost 3 fingers in Fredericksburg and didn't want reminders. Silas had cleaned the weapon 27 times. He refiled the hammer to reduce misfire. He customized the cylinder to reduce draw noise. She won't bark loud, he wrote, but she'll bite once. That one bite was all he planned for. One shot, no second chances, no martyrdom, no manifesto, no escape, just the bullet. Everything else was theater. He chose the date carefully, April 3rd, 1863, not just for the parade, but for its symmetry. It marked exactly 1 year since he had last seen Elijah, still alive, still laughing. They'd met by accident on the banks of the Rappahannock. 2 units crossing paths, one night only. Elijah had joked, "This war's gonna end with a sneeze." Silas had smiled, "Not if they keep letting farmers play generals." They'd shared bread, a cigarette, and stories about home. At sunrise, Elijah's unit marched north. He was dead by sundown. Antietam came months later. Silas came undone days after that. The final plan was drawn in a journal, now held in the MetaFacts Legends archival database. It read like choreography: enter Pennsylvania Avenue at 9:55 a.m. Blend left of the crowd, 5 persons from the curb. Remove gloves at 10:07. Unlatch coat at 10:10. Grip weapon at 10:11. Carriage slows by the Adams Building, 10:13. Draw and fire between 10 hours 30 minutes and 40 seconds and 10 hours 14 minutes and 10 seconds. He had rehearsed breathing patterns, trained himself to blink less. He avoided caffeine for 2 days before the event so his hand would be steady. On the morning of the parade, he wore 2 shirts. If the blood splashed back, it would catch on the inner layer. He intended to walk away, not because he thought he'd get away with it, but because that was part of the ritual. A full circle. Silas arrived at the spot early, stood next to a former sailor with missing teeth and a boy waving a cotton flag. He smiled once. "God bless the Union," he said aloud. The crowd nodded. He passed. He waited. The cheers grew. The carriage appeared. Lincoln seated alone, top hat in hand, head slightly tilted forward, right on time. Silas watched the wheel hit the uneven stone, just as he had calculated. He reached into his coat, touched the wood of the grip, and waited for the signal. Only there was none, because the only signal was his own decision. "If this is justice," he whispered, "then I am only the messenger." Then Lincoln looked at him. MetaFacts Legends interviewed a descendant of the boy who stood near Corbin that day. His family preserved a story passed down through generations. The president looked straight at a man in the crowd and didn't flinch. "My great-grandfather said he felt it too, even standing beside them." That time stopped. That's the part Corbin hadn't planned. Not the glance, not the eyes. It wasn't fear in Lincoln's face, nor challenge, just recognition, as if the president knew who he was, or what he carried. And then came the child. A boy darted forward, hoisted by his father. Laughter filled the space where silence had been. The small cotton flag waved once, between Lincoln and the muzzle of the hidden revolver. Corbin froze. One beat, then another. The gun stayed in the coat. He turned, walked east, past the fountain, toward the alley behind Waterman's stationery. Never looked back. In his final entry, Corbin wrote, "The gun was ready, the hand was steady, but the ghost in his eyes was mine, not his." He left the weapon on a train bound for Baltimore that night. The conductor found it in a rucksack under an unclaimed seat, filed the discovery. No one ever claimed it. Pinkerton recorded the incident in an internal memo. It was never released to the public. Lincoln heard about it days later. He read the report in silence, then said, "Even the prepared don't always fire. Sometimes the wound is too old to open again." "Do you believe he'll try again?" Hay asked. "No," Lincoln said. "He already did, in his mind, and the boy forgave him." End of chapter 3. Chapter 4: The Moment That Froze. April 3rd Road, 1863, 10:13 a.m. The sun angled sharply down Pennsylvania Avenue. The kind of light that hardens shadows and gilds the edges of uniform brass buttons, making even the cobblestones seem cleaner. It was the kind of day designed for ceremony. Abraham Lincoln sat in an open carriage, hands clasped over one knee, black hat resting on the seat beside him. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't frowning either. His expression was the same as it often was, burdened, distant, yet oddly calm. A man who heard the country's pulse through noise others mistook for celebration. The crowd was thick, flags waved like flame. Somewhere, a brass band was playing, but the music bled into the roar of voices. To most, it was a scene of joy. To Silas Corbin, it was a battlefield. He stood 20 feet back, just left of the center line, exactly where he had calculated the trajectory. His right hand was already curled around the grip of the pistol beneath his coat. Not clenched, just resting, ready. He had chosen this moment precisely. The turn in the road, the natural slowing of the wheels, the sun behind him, the crowd pressing forward, obscuring everything except the target. One shot, then vanish. The perfect end to a wound he had carried since Antietam. MetaFacts Legends has verified the minute-by-minute reconstruction of that route from original municipal traffic reports, parade timing sheets, and statements from Lincoln's driver and aides. The carriage slowed at the precise time Corbin had written in his ledger. It was all falling into place. But then, something shifted. Something small, insignificant, really. A boy, perhaps 8 years old, pressed forward, slipping between two adults. His father, caught in the tide of the crowd, had been momentarily separated. The boy, flag in hand, was lifted by man behind him and hoisted up, right into the line of fire. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't choreographed. It was real, and it was enough. Corbin froze. His finger didn't twitch, his body didn't sway, but his mind cracked. He saw Elijah, his brother, 10 years younger, climbing trees in the fall, waving a slingshot. The boy's face wasn't the same, but the movement was. The joy, the absurd, unknowing joy. Lincoln looked up, saw the boy. Then, he saw Corbin. Direct eye contact, no blink, no surprise, just knowing, as if the president understood what was about to happen, and had already made peace with it. As if he had seen this moment, too, in some version of a dream he hadn't told anyone about. Silas blinked once. The pistol remained under his coat. The seconds slowed. Everything else vanished. No music, no shouting, no flags. Just that stare, and the child between them. MetaFacts Legends reviewed a written recollection submitted in 1871 by journalist Charles L. Camden, who had been photographing the parade from the second-story window of a bookshop. He wrote, "I watched the president's gaze shift to a point in the crowd where no one else was looking. His face became still, the air changed, and for one moment, I believed something terrible had been delayed. Delayed, not erased, because that's how history works. It doesn't erase attempts, it simply buries the ones that failed. Silas lowered his hand. He turned. He didn't run. He didn't drop the weapon. He simply left, back into the alley behind Waterman's stationery, back into anonymity. Lincoln blinked once, then nodded toward the boy, tipped his hat. The crowd roared again, and history slipped past the wound it didn't receive. Later that day, Pinkerton would find the ledger. Later still, a clerk would misfile the photograph that captured the moment. And much later, MetaFacts Legends would piece it all back together. But that morning, it was just a breath. One breath between life and death. One boy standing in the way. One man too broken to fire. One president too human to run. Hay asked Lincoln that evening if he'd seen something strange in the crowd. Lincoln didn't answer immediately. Then, after a long pause, "Sometimes, God doesn't speak in thunder. He whispers through hesitation." Hay blinked. "Do you believe it was divine?" "I believe we're not always saved by angels. Sometimes we're spared by those who've already seen hell." That night, the city slept as if nothing had happened. But in a small room at a boarding house 4 blocks away, a man sat on the edge of a bed, holding a pistol in one hand and a crumpled flag in the other. He didn't cry. He didn't pray. He just stared out the window, toward the Capitol, toward the man he almost killed, toward a country that still hadn't figured out how to hold itself together. Silas Corbin would leave Washington the next day. He would never be arrested, never confess, never try again, but the moment remained. The photo remained. The ledger remained. And Lincoln, he would return to his desk, to his cabinet, to the war, unchanged in the eyes of the nation, but marked in the ways only survivors understand. MetaFacts Legends believes this story isn't about the bullet that never left the barrel. It's about the second before it might have. Because history changes in the smallest instance. A pause, a look, a child on a shoulder, and a heart not quite ready to fire. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. A hand that didn't shake. There are moments when everything depends on a tremble. One hesitation, one twitch, one subtle betrayal of the body. But on April 3, 1863, Silas Corbin's hand did not shake. Not when he slid the pistol into the inside pocket of his coat. Not when he stepped into the crowd. Not when the brass band drowned out the city's heartbeat. Not even when he looked straight at Abraham Lincoln. That stillness, that perfect control, was why Pinkerton later called him a ghost without a grave. And yet, he didn't fire. The moment passed, and so did history. But that wasn't the end of the story. Because even though Corbin didn't shoot, someone else saw him, someone with a camera. MetaFacts Legends recovered a photograph believed to have been taken less than 15 seconds before the potential shooting. A crowd shot, penned into the margin of the photographer's journal with these words: "Strange man, not clapping, watching, blue coat, eyes like winter." The photo never ran. It was sent to the Treasury Department for possible reproduction in an upcoming article on the parade. But it was pulled, quietly, misfiled, and nearly lost. For decades, it was thought destroyed. Then, in 1994, while digitizing Civil War-era prints for the National Image Preservation Project, a technician flagged it. What drew attention wasn't the quality. It was the angle, and one face, not Lincoln's, but Corbin's, dead center, looking at the lens, looking at us, not with fear, not with rage, with something else, resolution. The photo shows him mid-turn, his hand near the opening of his coat, his posture stiff, but unmistakably still. MetaFacts Legends worked with forensic visual analysts to enhance the image. The analysis confirmed the man's hand was gripping something inside his jacket. Not clenched, just prepared. The photo was taken at 10 hours 30 minutes and 46 seconds AM. Less than 5 seconds before the exact window Corbin had written in his journal for the shot. 5 seconds before nothing happened. Pinkerton operatives, who had been embedded in the crowd, reviewed the image that night. They knew what it meant. One of them, a man named Jared Fletcher, filed a short report. The subject made no move, but everything in him was ready. If this is what a failed assassination looks like, it may be harder to prevent than one that succeeds. The report was sealed, marked Non-Incident 12B, but the file wasn't destroyed, and decades later, MetaFacts Legends gained access through a request under the Freedom of Information Act. In that file was something else, a sketch, not by an artist, by Corbin himself. It was found in a room he had rented the night before the parade. On the back of a scrap of paper listing train times, he had drawn a perfect outline of the parade route. But that wasn't the strange part. He had circled one figure, labeled it simply me, and beside that, another figure, boy, the same boy who had accidentally stepped into the line of fire. Corbin had sketched him before he existed in the moment. Which meant what? Premonition? No, just memory. Corbin had seen him earlier that morning, standing with his father near the corner of 6th and Pennsylvania, waving a small flag. He had remembered the boy from another life, his own childhood, his brother, the one he had buried and never truly let go. In that boy, he saw what had been taken, and what he might now take again. It stopped him, but not everyone believed it ended there. A journalist, Charles L. Camden, wrote in his private memoir, "I spoke with a man that afternoon, just off the avenue. His hand was steady, but his voice cracked when he asked, 'Did you see the president smile at that boy?' I told him yes. He nodded and said, 'Then I won't be needed,' and walked away." Who was Camden's man? He never named him, but Camden's description matches Corbin exactly. Same coat, same height, same stillness. So what does it mean? That a killer changed his mind? Maybe, or maybe it means something simpler. That in the moment history begged for chaos, it got a pause instead. A single breath, the breath between violence and memory. And Lincoln, he knew. Later that evening, he called for Hay. He had been reading Shakespeare. As always, "Do you think a man can feel danger before it arrives?" Lincoln asked. "Yes," Hay replied, "animals do." Lincoln closed the book. "Then I felt it today." Hay stiffened. "You mean?" A hand almost moved, but didn't. "Should I alert Pinkerton?" "No," Lincoln said. "There are no arrests for what almost happens." And with that, it was done. No guards increased, no press briefed, only Lincoln's private note, written that night and sealed with no address. "Today I passed through something that did not touch me, but nearly did. If I am remembered, let it not be for the parades, but for the pauses between them." That note is stored today in a private collection in Springfield, Illinois, one of the last writings in his hand before Gettysburg. MetaFacts Legends believes this episode shows us more than history. It shows character, what a leader chooses to carry, and what he chooses not to speak. Because not every threat is a bullet. Sometimes it's a stare. Sometimes it's a hand that doesn't shake. And sometimes the most heroic moment is the one we never saw happen. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. The President Who Knew. April 4th, 1863. It was quiet in the White House that morning. Not in the way it often was during war, tense, breathless, but in a different way. Still, watching. Lincoln stood at the window of his second-floor study, hands behind his back, his long frame outlined against the glass. Below, Washington hummed slowly to life. A cart rattled by on 15th Street. A horse whinnied. A boy laughed in the distance. The parade was over. The flags had been folded. The crowd had returned to its routine. History had moved on, but Lincoln had not. He hadn't spoken much since the ride. He hadn't written, hadn't joked. He just kept going over the same question. What did I see? MetaFacts Legends reviewed 6 first-hand accounts from staff members who saw the president that day. Every one of them used the same word to describe him: unsettled. At 9:40 a.m., he summoned William Crook to the study. Crook had been assigned to Lincoln's protective detail less than a year earlier. And in that short time, he had learned something no textbook taught. When Lincoln asked for silence, He meant it, but when he asked for presents, you stayed, no matter how long it took. Crook, Lincoln said without turning. Have you ever felt someone's eyes before they speak? Crook stepped in slowly. Yes, sir, once, in the war. Lincoln nodded, still staring out the window. I felt them yesterday, in the crowd. Someone looked at me not like I was a man, or a leader, but a question he hadn't answered yet. Crook waited. Did you see him, sir? No, Lincoln replied, but I knew he was there. At 10:22 a.m., John Nicolay entered with the morning briefings. Lincoln waved him away. Not now, John. There's something missing, and I need to find it before he finds me. Later that afternoon, a Pinkerton envelope was delivered to the White House. Inside, a photograph, the same one found years later in the MetaFacts Legends archive. A man in a blue coat, standing in a crowd, not clapping, just watching. Lincoln studied the photo for a long time. He didn't raise the gun. He said aloud, but it was already loaded, in him. Mary found him at the table, head in hands. Abraham, it's over, you're safe. He didn't answer. You weren't touched, she said. He looked up slowly. I wasn't touched because he hesitated, not because he missed. That night, Lincoln wrote something in his private notebook. Not his official diary, not for history, a journal of moments that almost happened. He wrote, we speak of the bullets that fly. We rarely speak of the ones that wait. Today I was spared by a boy, a stare, and a hand that didn't shake. I have no words for that kind of mercy. He closed the book, locked the drawer, but the weight didn't leave. In the days that followed, he kept the photograph near him, not as evidence, as reminder. If I die, he told Hay, let it not be in ignorance. Let it be with eyes open, knowing it was never a matter of if, but when. Hay tried to reassure him. You've escaped too many times, sir. So had Caesar, Lincoln replied. At MetaFacts Legends, we uncovered a letter dated April 8, 1863, written by a Union officer stationed near the War Department. It reads, the president seems quieter. I saw him walking the corridor alone. No guards. He looked like a man who had seen a future no one else would admit exists. Crook confirmed years later in testimony. Mr. Lincoln asked for fewer guards after the parade. He said, if someone comes for me, let them come clearly. No more hiding, no more disguises. He was tired of shadows, tired of secrets, but most of all, he was tired of waiting. He began giving instructions to Hay about letters to be opened in the event of sudden incapacity. He asked Mary to review funeral arrangements, just in case. She resisted. He insisted. It is not fear, he said, it is preparation. What Lincoln did not know was that another message had already been written. And it was coming, a letter, no return address, no signature, delivered in silence, and it would be the most direct threat he had ever received, because it didn't scream. It whispered. Episode 8, The Anonymous Letter, coming next on MetaFacts Legends. Find the full story in the playlist below.